I'm Greg Wheatley, and my guest today on Inside Wheaton is Dr. Philip G. Ryken. Dr. Ryken, of course, is president of Wheaton College, and I think the last time he was here in our studio was with his father when we talked about their jointly authored book. But Dr. Ryken, it's great to have you here. I know you're busy schedule, and it's great for you to come over and make some time for us.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I'll try to do an interview all by myself this time.
Yeah, you did have your dad with you, but it was a great conversation, and we'll have to do that again sometime as well. So here we are as we're recording this. It's late summer. We're into August now, and that means for anybody connected to a college, here we go again, right?
Yeah, so to me, this is a really exciting time of year. There's a sense of anticipation with the beginning of the academic year. I love orientation and welcoming new members into our community. Looking forward to our academic convocation, and I'm just excited about beginning again this fall.
There's something in the air at a college about middle of August, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a big, you take a big inhale the first couple of weeks of August, yeah. And then you're right into it again by the end of August.
A lot of people who are connected with the college and know a little bit about what's been going on here will resonate with the phrase strategic initiatives, some things that you and the college leadership have put into place. Just give us a little bit of an update of where we stand.
Yeah, things are going well. To me, this is an exciting time because the plans that you've been making, the discussions you've been having actually now come to life, and you see the impact of it on campus. I was just a recent example. Just today, I received an email that had to do with care of our international graduate students. And it came from a reorganization and augmentation of our staffing for caring for international students. And it was just great to see even that little glimpse of improved care for our international students. But we're excited to welcome a freshman class that is probably going to be around 25% students of color, and that represents a lot of hard work and intentionality about building relationships in minority ethnic communities. We're excited to have a thriving Wheaton in Chicago program, and also to see other students going overseas in the fall semester, something we want to see increasingly as part of globalizing a Wheaton education. And meanwhile, we are prayerfully approaching people about their support for our new conservatory building and Center for Performing Arts. That continues to be something we leave before the Lord, as something we desire to have on campus and are awaiting His provision. But things are moving forward in a number of very significant areas. I'm also pleased to say that I think we will have a very strong proposal for a new general education curriculum that will be proposed to the faculty this fall. And very likely that would be something worth interviewing people about as that new curriculum comes forward. But I'm pleased with the progress that we've made over the summer. It's all advancing Christ-centered liberal arts education at Wheaton College.
Just, if you would, Phil, just elaborate on that a little for those who aren't in the know on that. What's the goal of that?
So Wheaton College is strongly committed to a liberal arts education. We give our students a breadth of preparation in philosophy and music and the arts and the natural sciences and the social sciences, as well as Bible and theology. But over the last several decades, our existing general education curriculum, that is, those courses that all of our students take regardless of their major, has been tweaked a little bit and adjusted, and it's lost some of its coherence and flexibility over the intervening years. And it's really time to revise that curriculum. And the faculty have been hard at work at that for several years, clarifying the goals. It'd be a little too early for me to say what will be in that new curriculum, but we want it to be really clear. It's a Christ-centered curriculum. The breadth of liberal arts learning is reflected in that curriculum. Strong emphasis on preparing students for the range of vocations that they will fulfill over a lifetime of kingdom service to Jesus Christ. Those are some of the goals we're striving for in the new curriculum.
And it really is the strength of a liberal arts college, isn't it? To be able to have that core that everybody shares, no matter if you're going to be a missionary or an engineer or a musician, whatever you're going to be, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a strength to the Wheaton College curriculum taken as a whole that it's more than the sum of its parts, I would say. And that's true no matter what your major is.
Yeah. Well, if anyone was watching CNN not too many weeks ago, I recall seeing my eyes kind of, my ears perked up in my eyes because there was Wheaton College in a headline about this HHS mandate. And I don't know what it does to a president of a medium-sized Christian college to see them on CNN. I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but we're in the news. And I think a lot of people want to know what's going on with the HHS mandate, what that means, what it means for a place like Wheaton College.
Well, it's you can't always control what shows up in the news, that's for sure. And Wheaton College often ends up in the news. I think it's because for many people, we define what it means to be an evangelical institution. We're highly regarded for our academic rigor. We're also well known for our biblical convictions. And so what happens at Wheaton matters. It matters to the church. It matters to the United States of America. In various ways, it matters to the world. And what happens here, therefore, sometimes gets into the news. There have been a lot of twists and turns in Wheaton's lawsuit against the Department of Health and Human Services, and it's certainly been something that's been in the news in the summer of 2014.
Can you take us back and just summarize the background to the lawsuit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a sense in which we would prefer never to have filed a lawsuit at all. In fact, when it first became apparent that the federal government was going to, as part of its much broader Affordable Care Act, but as part of the regulations related to that Affordable Care Act, that they were going to require many religious institutions to provide forms of contraception, as they are sometimes referred to in the media, but which can have, in certain circumstances, an abortifacient effect. Became apparent that the federal government recognized that there was a real issue of religious liberty and of freedom of conscience. It was clear to the government that some people of Christian conviction were going to be opposed to this kind of regulation. I say that because the government said if you are a church or synagogue or other house of worship, you do not have to provide these pharmaceuticals to your employees. However, if you are any other kind of religious institution, if you are a Christian publishing house, if you are a mission agency, if you are a Christian college, then you must provide these pharmaceuticals for your employees.
So something of a narrow definition they gave it. You had to be a church.
That's right. So as if the only freedom of religion we recognize in this country is for churches. And I think part of it is related to a broader cultural way of understanding religious liberty. Many people feel comfortable talking about freedom of worship, as long as that's something that you do in the privacy of your own home or in your own local house of worship. But in our culture, increasingly people are unfamiliar with and feel perhaps uncomfortable with freedom of religion, which is a much more pervasive liberty, and that's actually the liberty that's in the United States Constitution. I mean, what the First Amendment protects is freedom of religion and not merely freedom of worship. From the beginning, Wheaton College believed that it was a big mistake for our country to say that there are certain freedoms that you have if you are part of a church, but you don't have those freedoms if you're part of a Christian college. And we sought to appeal to the government privately at first, and then when this actually became a regulation, at that point we had no recourse, in our view, except to file suit.
And let's pick back up there in a minute. I want to take a little side trail and comment on something I heard, because sometimes I've heard this dealt with in the news, Phil, and it sounds to me like there's a confusion factor. People will sometimes frame this as, well, you're against contraception. That's how I've heard it framed sometimes. And that needs clarifying, doesn't it?
Well, most of the media reports about this issue have some level of inaccuracy. I can hardly think of any that have had it absolutely accurate on every factual point, but that's certainly one of them. Historically speaking, Protestant Christians have not opposed, in principle, certain forms of contraception. In fact, this has often been a key distinctive between Roman Catholic and Protestant theology. At Wheaton College, we certainly respect those who oppose contraception on moral or biblical or theological principles, but that is not our institutional position. We have freedom with regard to that at Wheaton College. What we are opposed to is anything that induces abortion. And some of the pharmaceuticals, which, by the way, historically both the Food and Drug Administration and the Department of Health and Human Services have regarded as having an abortive effect and have warned people about in their publications, they are now classifying some of those pharmaceuticals as contraceptives, but that's misleading, we believe, because they have an abortive effect.
Yeah. So some people will have heard about the Hobby Lobby case, and it was close, was 5-4, but it was in favor of Hobby Lobby. And they're going to look at Wheaton and say, well, didn't that take care of you as well? What happened there?
Yeah, the reason the Hobby Lobby decision does not resolve Wheaton's issues is because the Hobby Lobby decision related to for-profit businesses that were run by people, for example, of Christian conviction. But Wheaton is a nonprofit organization, and there are dozens of other nonprofit organizations, colleges, universities, publishing houses, mission agencies that have filed suit against the federal government. And the Hobby Lobby case does not resolve our point of issue with the government. It may have some bearing on it, and there are lots of ins and outs of legal opinions that you can dissect. And certainly there are things the Supreme Court has said that may have relevance for our case. But our case has, to date, not been heard and certainly not been adjudicated.
Something did come out on the heels of Hobby Lobby, though, that affects Wheaton, right? There was an injunction issued for...
Yes, and to put it in layman's terms, basically we had initially just appealed to the Department of Health and Human Services and said, would you just agree not to enforce this regulation against us until the courts have had a chance to hear our case? And they said, no, we really do want to enforce this against you. But initially our circuit court judge and then the Circuit Court of Appeals also sided with the government on this. But eventually the Supreme Court decided that they would grant us an injunction, which means that until our case has been heard, appealed, finally adjudicated, until that all happens, the government cannot enforce its regulation against Wheaton College. So it gives us a certain measure of protection in the interim, which I think is wise. I think it was a good decision by the Supreme Court because we have a principle of religious conscience at stake that should be respected, and hopefully it will be respected to the extent that it has the full backing of the law. We'll wait and see, but in the meantime, it's wise for the government not to be allowed to enforce it against us.
What are the implications of all this? First of all, I mean, for religious liberty, we've talked about some of those, but pragmatically for the Wheaton community or others like us, what would be the fallout of this?
You know, that's a kind of speculation I try not to get into. And the reason for that is that, as we've learned over the last 2 years, lots of things can happen in the course of litigation. Another thing that can happen is the government can change its regulations. The government actually has amended the contraceptive aspect of the Affordable Care Act, by my count, now 6 times, and has announced that it is likely to amend that regulation yet again. And it's just hard to predict what will happen. The bottom line for us is we continue to believe that our religious beliefs should not be merely accommodated, but that they should be fully respected and receive the same exemption that churches and other houses of worship have received. And that's been our conviction from the beginning, and we will seek to articulate that and advance that conviction as well as we can.
Presumably, there are a lot of places similar to Wheaton that are waiting to see what happens. I mean, this will be precedent setting, right? Not every school is bringing suit as we have.
Yeah, that's correct. And each school is in a different circumstance. Some schools have state legislation that has a real bearing on how they address these issues. There are dozens of institutions that have filed suit. It's generally thought that one or more of these cases will end up before the United States Supreme Court. It's impossible to predict which one. And it may well be the case that it's another case that's decided that then has a bearing on Wheaton College. One thing I will say is that it seems pretty clear that Wheaton's legal filing has now prompted the government at least twice to change its regulation. So this most recent announcement that they are going to make some adjustment to the accommodation they've proposed, it's directly in response to the Supreme Court injunction in Wheaton's case. So I think a reasonable argument could be made that even filing the suit that Wheaton has filed has prompted at least some movement from the government. We're not at the place that we would like to be, but there have been some positive effects of our legal filing already.
Is anyone able to put any kind of timetable on this? Any idea when this may progress?
It's generally thought that the Supreme Court, because of the large number of cases and of any executive branch regulation, this particular one has generated the most lawsuits in opposition of anything that the executive branch of the United States government has ever done. And so it's not surprising that one or another of those cases, as it comes up through the courts, one court will decide one way, another court will decide another way. And so it's not unlikely that the Supreme Court will at least have an opportunity to weigh in on these cases and perhaps to resolve a dispute between different cases at the circuit court level. It's generally thought that the Supreme Court will hear one or more of these cases in its next session, which would mean that in June of 2015, the Supreme Court would announce its final decision on these cases.
Obviously, with a base of alumni and supporters like Wheaton has, a lot of people want to pray for the college, and they do. If they're hearing this today, what would you like them to pray about?
We need the prayers of God's people every day for all kinds of things. I would encourage people to pray for the defense of religious liberty in the United States generally, and I would encourage people to do that whether they happen to agree with the case that Wheaton College is making or not, because I think we all have a stake in religious liberty. And religious liberty is a pre-political right. It has to do with human beings and their relationship to God, which comes before the institution of any earthly government, and has a higher claim than any earthly government. And I think we can all agree that it's right and good for people to be able to exercise freedom of religion and to have as much of that freedom as they can have. I would also encourage people simply to pray that God's will would be done through a very human legal process, and I don't claim to know what God's purposes are or what they should be. We're simply trying to be as faithful as we can to what we see that the Lord is having us do. But we would encourage people to pray for God's sovereign purposes to be worked out through this legal process.
Before we go, something completely unrelated, but Wheaton is also on the search for a new chaplain right now. Stephen Kello here, how many years? A lot of years. So
we're speaking in early August, and this is just one of our first days as a campus without Chap EK's ministrations now in 25 years. I'm very pleased to be able to say that the trustees have given him the formal and honorary title of Chaplain Emeritus, which means that Steve Kello continues to have not just a relationship with the Wheaton College and not just a place in our hearts, but actually a status, a role, a place of ministry that we hope will last for many years to come.
And so that's a big job to fill, isn't it? It's a very strategic
It certainly is.
job.
I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to name many positions on campus that have a bigger impact, certainly on the spiritual life of our student body. And it goes beyond that to faculty and staff as well. We're encouraged by the large number of very gifted applicants that we've had for this position. Many of them, but not all of them, are Wheaton alumni. And so it's a prayerful process of discernment that we'll be working through in coming months. We're not in a hurry. We want to identify the person of God's choice to lead Wheaton's student body in chapel in coming years.
Phil, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Greg.
Dr. Philip G. Ryken, the president of Wheaton College. And by the way, if you'd like to keep up with a lot of this news coming out of the college, let me encourage you to go to wheaton.edu, where you can find out all kinds of things about what goes on here, as well as keep up to date with these very important news stories. For Inside Wheaton, I'm Greg Wheatley.